The Founder of Demonic Cultivation. An English translation by ㅤㅤㅤㅤ. Read by Luna Minerva. Chapter 39. Flora, Part 8. If Ching had been any other girl of the same age, she would certainly have shrieked. But she had pretended to be blind for so many years, and since everyone thought she couldn't see, they often openly behaved in all sorts of ways in front of her. By this point, she had witnessed countless ugly things, and her heart had turned as hard as diamond. Thus, she remained resolutely silent. Nonetheless, Wei Wuxian still felt the waves of numbness travel up her stiff legs. Amidst the villagers' bodies strewn all over the ground, Xiao Xingchen stood and sheathed his sword. Is there really not a single living being in this village? All of them are walking corpses? He asked, his features screwed up in concentration. The corners of Xue Yang's lips curved into a smile. However, the sound which came from his mouth was full of puzzled astonishment, and even carried a note of bitter grief. That's right. Good thing your sword can point toward corpse energy on its own, or else it would have been very difficult for us to cut through this horde by ourselves. Let's check the village again. If there truly are no living people remaining, then we will burn these walking corpses as soon as we can. Only after they had wandered far away side by side did Ching's legs regain their strength. She slipped out from behind the house and walked to the pile of corpses. Lowering her head, she looked at them, her eyes traveling back and forth over the bodies. Wei Wuxian's gaze followed hers as it drifted, never staying still. Xiao Xingchen's sword had pierced each of these villagers cleanly through the heart. All of a sudden, Wei Wuxian noticed a handful of familiar faces. In the previous few memories, when Xiao Xingchen, Qing, and Xue Yang had gone out, they had encountered a few layabouts sitting at a crossing in the village and playing dice. When the three passed, the layabouts looked up at them. Catching sight of a big blind person, a small blind person, and a cripple, they broke into uproarious laughter, gesticulating wildly. Qing spat at them and waved her bamboo pole, but Xiao Xingchen pretended not to hear and walked past, his expression placid. Xue Yang even laughed, but there was no trace of amusement in his eyes. Qing turned over and examined several corpses in a row. She pried open their eyelids and saw that each of their pupils had turned white. There were a few whose faces had already become discolored with livor mortis. She let out a breath she had been holding. However, Wei Wuxian's heart sank lower and lower. Even though these people looked very similar to walking corpses, they had in fact been alive. Only they had been suffering from corpse poisoning. Wei Wuxian even saw traces of leftover violet powder near the noses and mouths of a few of the bodies. Because they were so heavily poisoned, some of these people would have been dead men walking, who admittedly were beyond the hope of rescue. But others hadn't been poisoned so severely and could have been saved. Namely, the villagers who hadn't been poisoned for long. Though their bodies would have started developing traits like transformed corpses and emitting corpse energy, they would have still been able to think and converse. They had still been alive. Like Lan Jingyi earlier, if someone had administered critical care to them, they could have still been rescued. You couldn't kill people like that, even accidentally. It amounted to slaughtering living humans. They would have been able to speak, to explain their identity, to call for help, if not for a certain problem. Someone had already cut out their tongues. Trails of blood trickled out of the side of the corpses' mouths. Some of this blood had dried, but some was still warm. Xiao Xingchen couldn't see, but Xuanhua could point him toward corpse energy. The villagers had lost their tongues and could only make eerie howls nearly indistinguishable from walking corpses' cries. Combine these two facts together, and he wouldn't have harbored a single suspicion that the things he was killing were anything but walking corpses. It was madness. Xue Yang had turned him into his knife. Secretly, he had taken advantage of Xiao Xingchen's generosity and maliciously turned it against him. However, Qing did not understand the cipher lying before her. Her knowledge was extremely cursory, derived entirely from the occasional moments when Xiao Xingchen had mentioned these subjects. Could that rotten thing really be helping Dao Chang? She mumbled. Don't start believing in Xue Yang so easily, Wei Wuxian thought. Fortunately, Qing's intuition was very sharp. Though she couldn't pick out anything strange from what she saw, her wary attitude toward Xue Yang was deeply rooted within her. She hated him on instinct and couldn't feel at ease with him. Thus, whenever Xue Yang followed Xiao Xingchen out to night hunt, she quietly tailed them. Even when they were all at home, she never let down her guard. One night, while the eastern wind howled, the three were crammed together next to the dilapidated stove in the little room for warmth. Xiao Xingchen was fixing a bamboo grocery basket, whose corner had developed a hole. Qing draped their sole cotton blanket over herself and wrapped herself as though she were a sticky rice dumpling, then scooted over to his side. Idly, Xue Yang rested his cheek on his hand. As he heard Qing continually pester Xiao Xingchen to tell her a story, his irritation grew. Stop making so much noise. I'll tie your tongue into a knot if you keep yapping. Qing had no inclination to listen to him whatsoever. Dao Zhang, I want to hear a story, she demanded. When I was small, no one told me any stories. How would I know how to tell you one? Xiao Xingchen asked. But Qing continued to nag. Just as she was about to start rolling on the floor, Xiao Xingchen said, All right, then I will tell you a story about something on a mountain. There was once a mountain. On the mountain there was a temple? No, Xiao Xingchen said. There was once a nameless mystic mountain, on which an immortal lived. This immortal had many disciples, but she did not allow them to leave the mountain. As soon as Wei Wuxian heard the opening, he understood. Bao Shan San Ren. Why? Qing asked. Because the immortal herself did not understand the world outside of the mountain, which was why she had hidden herself there. She told her disciples that if they wanted to descend from the mountain into the world below, then they need not return, that they ought not bring the conflicts of the outside world back to the mountain. How could the disciples stand it? Qing asked. Some of them must have found being stuck up there unendurable and come down the mountain to have fun. Yes, Xiao Xingchen said. The first to leave the mountain was an outstanding disciple. As soon as he went into the outside world, all praised and admired him for his skills and prowess, and he became a famous proper cultivator. But later, some unknown disaster befell him, and his character changed dramatically. Suddenly he turned into a monster who could kill people without blinking. Someone hacked him to death in the end. This man was named Yanling Daoren, and he was the first of Bao Shan San Ren's disciples to meet a terrible demise. What exactly Wei Wuxian's Shibuo had experienced that had changed his character so drastically was still a riddle to this day. Unfortunately, it was unlikely that anyone would ever find out. Once Xiao Xingchen finished fixing the basket, he felt it a few times. After confirming that it wouldn't prick anyone's hand, he set it down. The second person to leave was an outstanding female disciple, he continued. Wei Wuxian felt heat rise in his chest. Zhangse Sanren. Was she pretty? Qing asked. I don't know, Xiao Xingchen replied. People say she was very beautiful. Ching cupped her face with her hands. Then I know what happened. After she left the mountain, there must have been a lot of people who liked her and wanted to marry her. Then she must have gotten married to a high-ranking official or an important clan leader. Ah! Xiao Xingchen smiled. Your guess is incorrect. She married the servant of an important clan leader, and the two wandered high and far. I don't like that, Ching said. How could a beautiful, outstanding cultivator fall in love with a servant? Those sorts of stories are so tacky. They're just the perverted fantasies of broke scholars. What happened afterwards? After they started traveling? What were their lives like? Later they had an accident while night hunting and died, Xiao Xingchen said. What kind of story is that? Ching spat. Fine, she married a servant, whatever, but then they both died? I'm not listening anymore. Luckily, Xiao Xingchen hadn't gone on to tell her that the two had a monstrous son whom everyone despised. Or else she might have started spitting about me, Wei Wuxian thought. That is why I said from the beginning that I do not know how to tell stories, Xiao Xingchen said, exasperated. But you've got to remember your night hunts, right? I love hearing about those. Tell me, what kind of monsters have you fought before? Xue Yang's eyes had been closed the entire time, and he seemed as though he were both listening and not. Now, his expression became slightly more focused, and his pupils shrunk. He glanced sideways at Xiao Xingchen. There are far too many, Xiao Xingchen said. Is that true? Xue Yang suddenly said. Then, Dao Zhang, before were you also night hunting alone? The corner of his lip tilted upward, and he clearly looked up to no good. However, his voice sounded full of pure, simple curiosity. Xiao Xingchen paused, then smiled slightly. No. Ching's interest rose. Then, who else was with you? This time, Xiao Xingchen's pause was longer. After a while, he finally spoke. My best friend. A sly glint flashed in Xue Yang's eyes, and his smile widened. It seemed that he took more than a little pleasure in peeling away the bandages covering Xiao Xingchen's scars. Ching, on the other hand, was genuinely curious. Dao Zhang, who was your friend? What were they like? He was a man of great nobility, honesty, and virtue, Xiao Xingchen said calmly. Hearing his words, Xue Yang rolled his eyes with disdain. His lips moved a touch, as though silently uttering a few curses. Then, Dao Zhang, Xue Yang said, pretending to be puzzled. Where is your friend now? Given your current state, why hasn't he come around looking for you? What a poisonous little knife wound, Wei Wuxian thought. Sure enough, Xiao Xingchen did not reply. Though Ching didn't understand what was going on inside his head, she seemed to sense that something was happening. Holding her breath, she furtively glared at Xue Yang. The roots of her teeth itched as though she wanted to take a bite out of him. After being lost in thought for a while, Xiao Xingchen finally broke his silence. Where he is now, even I do not know. But I hope. Before he finished his sentence, he patted Ching's head and said, All right, we will stop here tonight. I truly do not know how to tell stories. It is too difficult. Oh, fine then, Ching said obediently. Surprisingly, Xue Yang spoke up. Then, how about I tell one? Yes, you tell one, Ching replied immediately, saved from disappointment just in time. Xue Yang spoke leisurely. There was once a child who really loved eating sweets, But because he didn't have a mother or father or any money either, he usually couldn't get a hold of any. One day, a day just like any other, he was sitting on some steps, staring blankly at nothing in particular. Across the streets from the steps, there was a restaurant in which a man sat beside a table set with a feast. This man saw the child and waved him over. Though the start of the story wasn't particularly good, it was much better than Xiao Xingchen's hackneyed tale. If Qing had had a pair of rabbit ears, they would have perked up now. This child was stupid and foolish. Xue Yang continued. He was already idle and aimless, so as soon as someone waved at him, he immediately ran over. The man pointed to a plate of desserts sitting on the table and asked the child if he wanted to have them. Of course, the child wanted them badly and furiously nodded. So the man gave the child a piece of paper and told him, "If you want them, take this to the other building over there. Once you're done, I'll give them to you." The child was very happy. He was going to get a plate of desserts for running an errand, and he would have earned them himself. He was illiterate, and as soon as he got the paper, he went off to where the man told him to go. The door opened, and a large, burly man emerged. The man took the paper and glanced over it, then struck the child so hard his nose started to bleed all over his face. Seizing him by the hair, the man asked him, "Who asked you to send this sort of thing here?" This child must have been none other than Xue Yang himself. However, seeing how sly and cunning Xue Yang was now, Wei Wuxian couldn't figure out how he could have been so dim-witted as a child, doing something just because someone asked him to. The words on the paper couldn't have been anything good. The man at the restaurant and the burly man probably had some kind of feud with each other. The former hadn't had the nerve to curse out the latter to his face, so he had called over a child sitting by the road to deliver the insulting message. Truly wretched conduct. Xue Yang continued. The child was afraid, so he pointed the way, and the burly man hauled him by the hair all the way back to the restaurant. But the man who had promised the desserts was long gone. On top of that, the uneaten desserts themselves had already been taken away by the waiter. The burly man thundered and roared, sending several tables flying. He left, hurling curses. The child was very anxious. He had delivered the message and been beaten for it, and had been dragged by his hair the entire way back. It had almost torn off his scalp. After all of that, he couldn't stomach the idea of being deprived of the desserts too. So, eyes gleaming with tears, he asked the waiter, "Where are the sweets? Where are the sweets that the man agreed to give me?" Xue Yang smiled as he spoke. The waiter had just seen his store wrecked, and rage had lit his heart aflame. He struck the child many times until the child's ears rang, and he had slapped him out the door. The child crawled back onto his feet and walked for a bit. Guess what happened next? He just so happened to run into the man who had asked him to send the message once again. At this point, Xue Yang stopped and did not start again. Entranced by the tale, Qing urged him onward. "Then what? What happened?" "What else could happen?" Xue Yang said. "Of course, he was slapped around and kicked a few more times." "The kid is you, right?" Qing said. "You love eating sweets. It must be you. How in the world were you like that when you were small? If I was in your place, I would have spat in his food and drink first, then hit him and..." As her limbs danced wildly, they almost struck Xiao Xingchen beside her. Hurriedly, he said, All right. We have finished listening to the story. Let's go to sleep now. He lifted Qing and placed her inside the coffin, but she continued to beat her chest and stamp her feet in rage. Oh, yeah, both of your stories are so infuriating. One is infuriatingly boring, and the other is infuriatingly horrible. Oh, I hate that man. He made a kid send the message in his place. It's so terrible, it's practically choking me. Xiaoxingchen tucked her into the blanket and walked a few steps away. What happened afterwards? He asked. Guess. There is no afterward. Didn't you stop telling your story too? Xue Yang said. No matter what happened later, now you're still safe and sound. There is no need to let the sorrows of the past weigh you down too much. They aren't weighing me down at all. Only the little blind one steals and eats my candy every day. She's finished them all off. So I couldn't help but remember the time I had no sweets to enjoy. Qing gave the coffin a few powerful kicks. Don't listen to his nonsense, Dao Zhang, she protested. I didn't eat that many at all. Xiaoxingchen laughed quietly. Let's all rest. That night, Xiaoxingchen went out on his own to night hunt, unaccompanied by Xue Yang. Qing also lay peacefully in the coffin, unmoving, but she was unable to sleep. Her eyes remained wide open the entire night. Just as light began to creep over the horizon, Xiaoxingchen returned silently through the door. When he passed the coffin, he extended his hand. Qing closed her eyes and pretended to sleep, waiting for Xiaoxingchen to leave the coffin home again before opening her eyes. When she did, she saw a small piece of candy lying beside her straw pillow. She poked her head out and gazed at the bedroom. Xue Yang hadn't slept either, and was instead sitting by the table, thinking about something. At the edge of the table, another piece of candy quietly lay. Each day after the night they had gathered and conversed around the stove, Xiaoxingchen gave both of them a piece of candy. Qing was, of course, elated, but Xue Yang expressed no gratitude for the gesture, yet neither did he refuse it. She greeted this attitude with resentment for many days. Xiaoxingchen took care of both the meals and the lodgings for all three of them. Since he was blind, he was unable to be picky about the vegetables he bought, and he was too embarrassed to haggle with the vendors. This was no big deal if the hawkers he ran into while out alone were kind-hearted. Unfortunately, however, on many occasions he encountered those who intentionally took advantage of his blindness, who either gave him less than he had paid for, or produce that wasn't fresh. Though Xiaoxingchen himself didn't seem to mind much, or possibly didn't even take much notice in the first place, it very much rubbed Qing the wrong way. Furious, she insisted aggressively on accompanying Xiaoxingchen to buy groceries, so she could find those good-for-nothing peddlers and settle the score. But to no avail, though she could see she couldn't expose that fact. And moreover, she didn't have the nerve to make a scene and mess up the hawker's stalls in Xiaoxingchen's presence. At times like this, Xue Yang came in handy. A hoodlum by nature, he had sharp eyes and a poisonous tongue. When they wanted to buy anything, as long as he was accompanying them, he'd find the hawker first and shamelessly bargain down the price by half. If the hawker was still willing to sell, he'd push even further, give him an inch, and he would take a mile. If the hawker was unwilling, his eyes would gleam ominously. Upon seeing this, the hawker would conclude that they were already lucky that this man was willing to pay at all. So however much he offered, it was best not to bicker. Instead, better to get him to leave. Leave as quickly as possible. Back when Xue Yang was running wild in Kuizhou and Lanling, he most likely got whatever he wanted without paying a thing. Qing had now vented her anger, and in her happiness, she even offered Xue Yang a few words of praise. On top of that, the daily piece of delicious candy kept her in high spirits. Thus, for a while after, she and Xue Yang managed to maintain a quiet peace. However, she could never let go of her wariness of him. Thus, this moment of peace was soon buried by her many silent criticisms and misgivings. One day, Qing was once again out on the street, pretending to be blind to amuse herself. She had played this game for a lifetime, and she never got sick of it. Just as she was knocking her wooden pole against the ground and walking back and forth, a voice suddenly sounded from behind her. "Miss, if you can't see, don't walk so fast." The voice belonged to a young man and sounded a bit cold. Qing turned and saw a tall, black-robed Taoist cultivator standing a few meters behind her. A sword was slung over his back, and in his arm he carried a horsetail whisk, his sleeves fluttering in the breeze. His posture was straight and upright, and he had an honest, proud, and somewhat haughty air about him. His face was none other than Song Lan's. When Qing cocked her head, Song Lan had already walked over. He placed his horsetail whisk on her shoulder and guided her to the side. There are few people on the edge of the road. He does deserve to be called an intimate friend of Xiao Xingchen's, Wei Wuxian thought. Intimate friends have to have similar character and conduct. Qing giggled.
Qing, thanks, Dao Zhang.
Song Lan withdrew the horsetail whisk and placed it in the crook of his arm again. He glanced over her. "You shouldn't play around so wildly. The yin energy here is strong. Don't linger outside once the sun sets."
"Okay,"
Qing said. Song Lan nodded and continued forward. She couldn't help but turn to watch him, only to see him walk for a bit, then stop a passerby. "Please wait," he said. "May I ask, has anyone seen a blind, sword-wielding Taoist cultivator nearby?" Immediately, Qing began listening with rapt attention. "I'm not sure," the passerby said. "Dao Zhang, maybe you should ask someone else up ahead." "Thank you very much," Song Lan said. Tapping her bamboo pole, Qing walked toward him.
"Dao Zhang, why are you looking for the other Dao Zhang?"
Song Lan whirled around. "You've seen him?"
"Maybe I have. Maybe I haven't,"
Qing replied. "What must I do for you to have seen him?"
"If you answer a few of my questions, then maybe I'll have seen him. Are you that Dao Zhang's friend?"
Startled, Song Lan stared blankly for quite a while before speaking. "Yes."
Why did he hesitate?
Wei Wuxian wondered. Qing also found this answer reluctant. Suspicions raised, she continued. "Do you really know him?
How tall is he? Is he pretty or ugly? What does his sword look like?"
"He is about as tall as me," Song Lan immediately replied. "His appearance is beautiful, and his sword is engraved with patterns of frost." As his reply was free of the slightest error, and he didn't seem like a bad person, Qing said,
"I know where he is. Dao Zhang, why don't you follow me?"
By that point in time, Song Lan had run around everywhere for many years looking for his friend, and had suffered disappointment countless times. Now that he finally received news, he was afraid to believe it, and was also desperately trying to maintain his cool. "Thank you for your trouble." Qing led him near the coffin home, but Song Lan stopped, standing frozen a fair distance away.
"What's wrong?"
Qing asked.
"Why aren't you coming over?"
For some reason, Song Lan's face had gone pale, and he stared at the main entrance of the coffin home, as though he wanted nothing more than to rush in, yet also dared not actually do so. He had long lost his previous cold and aloof appearance. Is he losing his nerve now that his friend is so close? Wei Wuxian thought. But just as Song Lan finally made up his mind to enter, someone beat him to it and strolled past him inside. As soon as Song Lan saw clearly who the figure was, his face, already pale, turned ashen. A laugh echoed from inside the coffin home. Qing harumphed. That horrible demon is back. Who is he? Song Lan asked. Why is he here? Some bad guy, Qing whined. He won't even tell us his name. Who knows who he is? Dao Zhang rescued him, and now the horrible man spends his whole day wrapped around him. I hate it to death. Shock and fury mingled over Song Lan's face, his complexion turning simultaneously white and green. After a moment, he said, Quiet! Frightened by his expression, Qing indeed made no sounds. The two held their breaths and silently crept up to the wall of the coffin house. One stood next to the window, and the other crouched beneath it. Inside, they heard Xiaoxingchen speaking. Whose turn is it today? The moment Song Lan heard his voice, his hands started shaking so intensely that even Qing could clearly see it. How about we stop taking turns from now on? Change things up, Xue Yang said. Of course you bring this up now that it's your turn. What method do you suggest? There are 2 sticks here. If you draw the long one, you won't go, but if you draw the short one, you will. How about it? After a moment of silence, Xue Yang started chortling. Yours is the short one. I won! You go. All right, I'll go, Xiaoxingchen replied with resignation. It sounded as though he had risen and was walking toward the door. Very good. Come out quickly, Wei Wuxian thought. It's best if Song Lan just snatches him away and starts running. But after Xiaoxingchen had taken no more than a few steps, Xue Yang spoke once more. You can come back. I'll go. Why are you now willing to go again? Xiaoxingchen asked. Xue Yang stood up too. Are you stupid? I tricked you right then. I drew the short stick, only I had already hidden another, even longer stick. No matter which stick you drew, I could pull out a longer one. I was just picking on you for being blind. After teasing Xiaoxingchen a bit, Xue Yang picked up his basket and strolled leisurely out the door. Qing looked up at Song Lan. His entire body was shaking, but she was unable to comprehend why he was so furious. Song Lan indicated to her to remain silent, and the two held their breaths again and quietly walked away. Only after they had walked a considerable distance did he begin questioning Qing. This person, Xing, that Dao Zhang, when did he rescue that man? His tone was grave, and Qing understood that this was no small matter. Her response was also solemn. He was rescued a long time ago, almost a few years now. That Dao Zhang has been unaware of his identity the entire time? Song Lan asked. Yes, Qing said. What has he been doing while he's been by the Dao Zhang's side? Being a loudmouth, bullying me, scaring me. Also he goes night hunting with Dao Zhang. Song Lan's eyebrows trembled. He also believed that Xue Yang's intentions could not possibly be good. Night hunting? Night hunting what? Do you know? Afraid of being careless, Qing thought for a while before speaking. There was a time earlier when they were hunting a lot of walking corpses. Now all they hunt are things like ghosts and livestock that have started acting strange. Song Lan interrogated her thoroughly, seemingly unable to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. However, try as he might, he couldn't pluck out a shred of a clue. Does the Dao Zhang have a good relationship with him?
Despite her unwillingness to acknowledge it, Ching still explained. I feel like Dao Zhang is unhappy by himself. He finally has a fellow cultivator, so he seems to like listening to that horrible guy make wisecracks. Black clouds shadowed Song Lan's face. He appeared both angry and disturbed. In the midst of his great confusion, he knew only one thing for certain. He absolutely could not allow Xiao Xingqian to find out what had happened. Don't tell the Dao Zhang anything unnecessary, he said. Once he finished, he schooled his expression and turned to pursue Xue Yang. Dao Zhang, are you gonna beat up that horrible thing? Qing asked. But Song Lan was already far gone. Not only is he gonna beat Xue Yang up, he's gonna skin him alive, Wei Wuxian thought. Xue Yang had been carrying a basket when he walked out the door, so Qing knew that he would take the road they followed when they went out to buy groceries. She took a shortcut through a nearby forest, flying like wind the entire journey, her heart thumping wildly. After pursuing Xue Yang for a period, she finally saw his silhouette before her. In one hand he was holding the basket, which was stuffed full of greens, radishes, steamed buns, and the like. He yawned as he strolled lazily along. It seemed he had finished shopping and was returning. Qing had a habit of hiding away in order to eavesdrop, so she stealthily crouched in the shrubbery at the edge of the forest and followed him, creeping along. Suddenly, Song Lan's cold voice came from up ahead. Xue Yang! As though someone had just thrown cold water directly in his face or slapped him awake in the middle of a dream. Xue Yang's complexion turned an exceptionally ugly color at once. Song Lan emerged from behind a tree, his sword already drawn and in his hand, the tip of the blade pointed downward. Xue Yang feigned astonishment. Oh yeah, aren't you Song Dao Zhang? You visit so rarely. Are you here for a free meal? Song Lan lifted his sword and thrust at him, but Xue Yang shook Jiang Zai out from his sleeve and parried. The younger man retreated several steps and placed the grocery basket next to a tree. You shitty priest. I came out to buy groceries on a whim, and then you motherfucker had to show up and ruin this scenery! In the grip of wild fury, Song Lan closed in on Xue Yang, threatening his life with each blow. Exactly what kind of trick are you playing, you treacherous toad? What exactly are you trying to accomplish by hanging around Xiao Xingqian for so long? I was wondering why Song Dao Zhang was holding back. Turns out he wants to ask about this. Xue Yang said, laughing. Speak! Song Lan shouted in rage. Why would a piece of scum like you do something nice, like helping him night hunt? Sword energy brushed past Xue Yang, slicing a gash into his face. Unperturbed, he said, Wow. Song Dao Zhang knows me so well. Between the two, one had walked the path of a proper Taoist cultivator, whereas the other had carved his own wild road with fire and death. Song Lan's swordsmanship was clearly better than Xue Yang's. With a single thrust, he stabbed Xue Yang through the arm. Speak! If not for the disturbing nature of the situation and Song Lan's desperate need for answers, the sword might have impaled not his arm, but his neck. Despite the wound, Xue Yang's expression remained unchanged. Do you really want to hear what happened? I'm afraid you'll go insane. There are some things that you're better off not knowing. Xue Yang, my patience with you has limits, Song Lan said coldly. Clang. Xue Yang parried a thrust aimed at his eyes. Fine. Here's what you insist on hearing. do you know what your dear friend, your intimate friend has done? He's killed many walking corpses. He cut down monsters and exterminated ghosts, asking nothing in return. Very touching. Though he dug out his eyes for you and blinded himself, fortunately, Xue Yang can point him toward corpse energy on its own. Even more wonderfully, I discovered that Xue Yang can't tell the difference between living corpses and dead ones. So if you just cut out the tongues of people who've been corpse poisoned to keep them from talking... Xue Yang's explanation was meticulously detailed. Song Lan's hand shook so hard it traveled all the way through his blade. You bastard! You're worse than a beast, you monster! Song Daozhang, sometimes I think educated people like you are at a horrible disadvantage when it comes to cursing people out, Xue Yang said. You just repeat the same few words. So unoriginal. So toothless. I stopped using those words when I was only, 7. In an uncontrollable fury, Song Lan struck again, lunging at Xue Yang's throat. You took advantage of his blindness and deceived him so cruelly. The attack was fast and ferocious. Xue Yang narrowly avoided death, but the blade still pierced his shoulder. Yet he acted as though he hadn't felt it. He didn't even furrow his brow. His blindness? Song Daozhang, have you forgotten who he dug out his eyes and blinded himself for? When Song Lan heard this, both his expression and his movements grew rigid. Xue Yang continued. What position are you denouncing me from? Your position as a friend? Don't you feel ashamed to call Xiao Xingchen your friend? Song Daozhang, do you need me to remind you of what you said after I massacred everyone at Bayan Monastery? Xiao Xingchen was worried for you and came because he wanted to help you. But what was your attitude toward him then? What did you say? Song Lan's heart was in utter turmoil. At the time, Xue Yang cut him off. At the time, were you angry and grieving? You were suffering? Your heart had been shattered? You were in anguish and had no place to let out the fire? So you took your fury out on him. To be fair, the reason I slaughtered your monastery was indeed because of him, so taking your anger out on him was excusable. And just what I had wanted. Each word was a vital blow. Step by step, both Xue Yang's hand and his tongue closed in on Song Lan. The younger man's strikes grew more and more at ease, but also more ruthless and wily. He had already gained a slight upper hand, and Song Lan was none the wiser. Hey, exactly who said there's no need for us to see each other again? Don't tell me it was you, Song Daozhang. Xiao Xingchen listened to and followed your command. Once he dug out his eyes and gave them to you, he disappeared from your presence. So why are you running after him now? Aren't you making things difficult for him? Xiao Xingchen Daozhang, do you agree? Startled, Song Lan froze mid-attack. He could only have fallen for such a basic trick because by that point, Xue Yang had already thrown him entirely off his rhythm and scrambled his mind and emotions. Of course, Xue Yang could not pass up such an exquisite opportunity. With a wave of his hand, he scattered corpse poison into the sky. It sprinkled down all around them. Prior to this, such meticulously refined corpse poison was unheard of, including by Song Lan. He breathed in several mouthfuls. Immediately he knew he had walked into disaster and started coughing repeatedly. But Xue Yang's Jiangzai was waiting, long ready for its chance. The tip of the blade flashed and flew into Song Lan's mouth. In an instant, Wei Wuxian's vision went dark. Qing had shut her eyes in fright. But he already knew. This was the exact moment Song Lan's tongue had been severed. The sound was terrifying. The rims of Qing's eyes grew hot, but she clenched her teeth as though her life depended on it, remaining silent. Her eyelids trembled as she opened her eyes again. With great difficulty, Song Lan had propped himself up on his sword. His other hand was covering his mouth, but blood gushed out in an endless stream from the cracks between his fingers. His tongue suddenly severed through Xue Yang's scheming. Song Lan was now in so much agony he could hardly walk. However, he still pulled his sword out of the ground and staggered toward Xue Yang. He lunged at the youth, but Xue Yang dodged effortlessly, his whole face twisted into a smirk. The next moment, the reason for the smirk became clear to Wei Wuxian. Xuanhua's silver light had pierced through Song Lan's chest, passing right beneath his ribcage and out through his back. Song Lan looked down upon Xuanhua, whose tip had plunged straight through his heart. Slowly, he lifted his head and saw Xiaoxing holding the sword, a tranquil expression on his face. "Are you there?" Xiaoxing asked, entirely oblivious to what had just passed. Song Lan moved his lips silently. "I'm here," Xue Yang said with a smile. "Why are you here?" Xiaoxing pulled his sword from Song Lan's body and sheathed it. Xuanhua was behaving strangely, so I followed it to see what was happening. Sounding puzzled, he continued. "It's been a very long time since a walking corpse has appeared in these parts. On top of that, it is alone. Did it come here from elsewhere?" Slowly, Song Lan kneeled in front of Xiaoxing. Xue Yang gazed smugly down upon the dying man. "That sounds right. The noises it makes are terrifying." At this point, if Song Lan had only placed his sword in Xiaoxing's hand, his friend would have immediately realized who he was. The sword of an intimate, close friend Xiaoxing would recognize at a single touch. But Song Lan could no longer do any such thing. How could he give his sword to Xiaoxing and tell him who he had killed with his own hands? This was all according to Xue Yang's calculations. Thus, the youth felt perfectly safe. "Let's go home and cook dinner. I'm hungry." "Did you finish buying groceries?" "Yes, running into something like this on the way back. How unlucky." Xiaoxing took a step forward. Xue Yang patted the wounds on his arms and shoulders, then picked up the basket again. When he passed in front of Song Lan, a slight grin played across his lips. Looking down, Xue Yang said to him, "You don't get a share." Only after Qing had waited for Xue Yang to walk far, far away did she finally rise out of the shrubbery. By then, he and Xiaoxing had probably already arrived at the coffin home. She had squatted for too long, and her legs had gone numb. Shaking in fear and leaning on her bamboo pole as though it were a crutch,
She staggered towards Song Lan's kneeling corpse, which had already gone stiff. Song Lan had not died a peaceful death. When Ching saw his wide-open eyes, she leapt in terror. Then she saw the fresh blood pouring out of his mouth, flowing down his jaw, over the front of his robes, and finally to the ground. Tears fell from his eyes in fat droplets. Fearfully, Ching reached out and closed Song Lan's eyes for him. Kneeling in front of him, she placed her palms together and spoke.
Daojiang, please don't blame me or the other Daojiang. If I had come out, I would have died too, so I could only hide. I couldn't rescue you. The other Daojiang was tricked by that horrible thing. He didn't do it on purpose. He didn't know that the one he killed was you.
Choking and sobbing, she continued.
I have to go back. As a dead spirit, you have to help me and protect me, so I can rescue Xiaoxing Chen Daojiang. Help me and protect us, so we can escape that monster's clutches. Make that evil beast Xue Yang die a horrible death. Make sure his body is broken into 10,000 pieces and he's never reborn again.
When she finished speaking, she paid her respects to Song Lan, pressing her forehead to the ground 3 times in front of him. She forcefully wiped her face a few times, then stood up. Summoning her strength, she walked toward Yi City. By the time she arrived at the coffin home, it was already dark. Xue Yang sat by a table, paring an apple. He appeared to be in a very good mood. He had even carved the pieces of the apple into the shape of rabbits. To anyone's eyes, he would have looked like no more than a mischievous young man. No one would have suspected him of doing what he had done earlier. Hearing Ching return, Xiaoxing Chen emerged, carrying a plate of vegetables. Ching, where did you play around today? You're home so late. Xue Yang glanced at her. Suddenly, something flashed in the depths of his eyes. What's wrong? Her eyes are swollen. Hurriedly, Xiaoxing Chen walked over to her. What happened? Did someone bully you? Bully her? Who's capable of bullying her? Xue Yang said. Though he wore a conspicuous smile, it was clear that in his mind, suspicion had started to prickle. Abruptly, Ching threw her bamboo pole to the ground and started wailing. Her tears mingled with mucus as they ran down her face, and her breaths came in stops and starts. Sobbing, she ran into Xiaoxing Chen's arms.
Am I ugly? Am I really that ugly? Daojiang, tell me, am I really so ugly?
Xiaoxing Chen patted her on the head. Of course not. Ching is very pretty. Who told you were ugly? You're ugly as sin, and you're even uglier when you're crying, Xue Yang said disdainfully. Don't act like this, Xiaoxing Chen reproached him. Ching's sobs grew even more violent.
Daojiang, you can't even see me,
she said, stamping her feet.
What's the point of telling me I'm pretty? You could only be tricking me. He can see and he says I'm ugly. It looks like I really am ugly. Ugly and blind.
Seeing her throw such a fit, the 2 men naturally came to believe she was upset because she had run into some children somewhere outside, who had probably shouted monikers like hideous monster or blind wide-eyed hag at her. You're running home crying just because someone called you ugly? Xue Yang said scornfully. Where did your normal boorish attitude go?
You're the boor,
Ching cried.
Daojiang, do you have any money left?
Xiaoxing Chen paused and looked rather embarrassed. I think probably yes. I have some, I'll lend it to you, Xue Yang interjected.
You've been eating and living with us for so long, but if we need to use a bit of your money, we still have to borrow it?
Qing spat.
You miserly ghoul! Aren't you ashamed? Daozhang, I want to buy some pretty clothes and jewelry. Will you come with me?
So she's trying to lead Xiaoxing out, Wei Wuxian thought. But what if Xue Yang wants to go with them? Then what will she do? Of course I can, but I can't help you see whether or not something suits you, Xiaoxing said. I'll help her look, Xue Yang interrupted again. Qing leapt up and nearly collided with Xiaoxing's jaw.
I don't care, I don't care, I don't care. I only want you to come. The last thing I want is him there. He'll just tell me I'm ugly. He'll call me little blind one.
As she had thrown irrational tantrums on more than a couple of occasions, the two others were well accustomed to such behavior. Xue Yang made a face at her, while Xiaoxing said, All right, how about tomorrow?
I want to go tonight,
Qing said. If you go tonight, the market will already be closed. Where would you buy anything? Xue Yang said. Out of options, Qing could only reply,
Fine, then we'll go tomorrow. It's a deal.
Now that her plan had been foiled, Xue Yang was certain to become suspicious again if she continued to whine about going out. She had no choice but to drop the issue, sit at the table, and eat her meal. Though Qing's earlier act had been completely natural, and she had appeared perfectly normal, her stomach had been tense with anxiety from beginning to end. Even now, the hand she picked up her bowl with was still shaking. Sitting just to her left, Xue Yang took sidelong glances at her, and the muscles in her legs started to go taut again. Afraid that she wouldn't be able to force any food down, she pretended that her rage had made her lose her appetite and spat out everything she put in her mouth. She stabbed her bowl viciously with her chopsticks, muttering curses. Stupid bastard, ugly little hag. It's not like you're anything to look at either. Lowlifes. The other two listened as she continued ranting about the non-existent ugly little hag. Xue Yang rolled his eyes. Don't waste food, Xiaoxing said. Xue Yang's gaze left Qing and swiveled toward Xiaoxing's face. This little hooligan's imitation of Xiaoxing wasn't so accurate for no reason, Wei Wuxian thought. After all, he used to sit across the table from Xiaoxing daily and had every chance to carefully observe him. However, Xiaoxing was completely unaware of the pair of eyes fixed upon his features. After all, he was the only genuinely blind person sitting in the room. After dinner, he gathered up the bowls and chopsticks and went into the other room. Unable to sit still, Qing intended to accompany him, but Xue Yang abruptly called out to her. Qing. Her heart flew into her throat. Even Wei Wuxian could feel the prickles of fear exploding over her scalp. Why are you suddenly calling my name? She said. Weren't you the one that said you didn't like for me to call you little blind one? When someone like you is being nice for no reason, it means you could only be up to no good. What exactly are you trying to do? Xue Yang smiled. Nothing. I just wanted to teach you what to do the next time someone shouts at you and calls you names. Oh, say it then. What should I do? Qing replied. If some girl calls you ugly, make her uglier. Take a knife and cut up her face a dozen or so times so that she's too afraid to go outside and talk to anyone for the rest of her life. If someone mocks you for being blind, take your bamboo pole, sharpen it, and stab them once in each eye so that they'll be blind too. See if they still have the guts to insult you. Qing's hair stood on end. Pretending that she thought he was just trying to frighten her, she replied, You're trying to scare me again. Believe that if you want. Once Xue Yang finished speaking,
He pushed the plate with the rabbit-shaped apple pieces toward her. "Have some." As they looked upon the adorable precious apple rabbits, with their red skin and pale flesh, Qing and Wei Wuxian felt waves of cold loathing seep into their hearts. Bright and early the next day, Qing started pestering Xiao Xingchen to take her out to buy pretty clothes and makeup. Disgruntled, Xue Yang said, "If you two leave, then won't I have to buy today's groceries again?" "If you do, so what?" Qing said. "How many times has Daozhang gone out to buy them? You're always playing tricks and bullying Daozhang to get yourself out of doing your fair share." All right, I'll buy them. I'll go right now," Xue Yang said. After he left, Xiao Xingchen said, "Qing, aren't you finished getting ready yet? Will we be able to go now?" She only entered the room when she had determined that Xue Yang was long gone. As she closed the door and spoke, her voice trembled. "Daozhang, do you know anyone called Xue Yang?"